of science. So his science is his art, right? So we are expecting the science of art from Dr. Max. Your audio is not there. Please make your audio.
All right.
Yeah.
Hello,
Right.
everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, now you are audible. Yeah.
Wonderful. So it is so good to be here, being able to speak at this wonderful forum. Thank you, Green Mentors, for the invitation. So I'm going to start just by giving a little bit of background, and then I'll give a short presentation about my work. So I am the executive director and co-founder of Artolution, and we are an international community-based public arts organization. And our main focus is being able to work in different communities around the world using art education and really public arts programs to be able to educate and to be able to train local artists and educators in different refugee camps, conflict zones, traumatized communities around the world, how to be able to facilitate programs with children and with communities to be able to tell their own stories about what's most important to them and to the planet. We've been doing this extensively, really for the last 10 years, me and my partner, Joel Bergner, but then we've now grown that we actually have teams of artists in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, in the South Sudanese refugee camps in Uganda, in the Syrian refugee camps in Jordan, as well as when the displaced Venezuelan communities in Colombia, as well as throughout the United States. And we've done these programs globally in over 30 countries, working with hundreds and hundreds of different projects and thousands of different communities. So I'm going to start by seeing if I can share my my presentation. Hoping to be able to come on. And Mr. Rawat, if you might be able to do it, I'm seeing it's not allowing me to share it. So I don't know if you'd be able to. I would appreciate it.
No, screen is share. You can share. Please just share the screen. Yes.
It's at the bottom, Max. If you go to share screen, a green button, green box. I think Mr. Rawat, you have to help him because he's doing through iPhone.
Okay, I'll do that. कृष्णा यहाँ तो हाँ तो कर देगी मैं कर रहा हूँ तो कर लेगी
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so if you can present that, and I'll just say maybe slide, and then you can switch to the next slide. I really appreciate this so much. So our work is really focused on being able to have local communities telling their own stories and being able to find ways that can impact the way that would matter most within their contexts. And so we have an extensive training manual and curriculum that's really based off of a training of trainers, of being able to have our methodology and curriculum that is shared, but it's all based on interactive storytelling, on being able to identify what the most important issues are, and then that being able to come through public arts mediums. And so when it comes to the planet, each of the different environments that we work in has different issues that are specifically oriented towards what matters most to them. And so if you go to the next slide, I think what's so important is thinking about that one kid, right? About that one little boy or that one girl, and being able to think what matters most to them. What is going to impact the way that they can understand it within their own local context, within their own idioms of expression, if you will. And what does that mean psychologically to a child to know about what's happening within their lives and within their local communities, to be able to express that through a public arts program? So this is a boy working in the Balukali Rohingya refugee camp, and within this context, it's so important that if those who have not had the opportunity to have an education, to have literacy, to have even basic public health programs, it's so important to be able to think about what can it mean to be able to use the arts to communicate messages that are so difficult to communicate in any other way. And so what we found is that being able to use a paintbrush, being able to use a pencil, or being able to use, as was amazingly described previously within the Green Hope Foundation, being able to use unconventional means to have alternative education as a way to teach and to get kids to be passionate about what's happening within the planet. And so as we're getting this presentation set up, I really wanted to also specifically focus on the importance of having local leadership as a way of changing what it means to be able to have grassroots initiatives that really matter. So our work always has 50% women, 50% men, and being able to have a range of topics that are discussed that come from interactive storytelling workshops where kids are all able to tell their stories. They're able to make drawings and be able to have discussions that are primarily focused on how we can take everybody's different ideas and put them together into a single composition, into a single story. And that story then continues to live within those communities. And so being able to say, okay, if we're going to talk about the planet, what is a way that we could use this to teach and to be able to make a transformation so that the youth who are students can become advocates for social change? And that advocacy then is able to be translated through creativity and through expression. And that the arts then are a way to be able to shift an entire conception of what it means to learn. And learning in itself, we found, can have many different meanings across different contexts. Perfect. There we go. So if you can go to the next one, the next slide. Again, I apologize to everyone watching that my computer had died. But this is a girl named Noor who we're working with in the Syrian Azraq refugee camp. And, you know, one of the most important things is to be able to shift the conception of what is, who is a refugee? Who is this girl? And to think about that it's very important to have that personalized conception of who she is, and humanization, which is so important. Now, when we think about this from a sustainability perspective, you know, global warming and climate refugees is such a major issue for so many different reasons, both of human-made conflicts, but also conflicts that are made by the environment. If you can go to the next slide. What's so important is you look at these kids, and there's this amazing sense of engagement, of care, of wanting to be involved. And what we're finding is that when you're able to use the arts, it's able to rise the engagement levels across different types of populations. In this specific context, that we've actually found from our studies and our work with UNICEF, with Save the Children, UNHCR, with different large international institutions, that actually there's been a huge rise in attendance into the different centers, the learning centers, the informal learning spaces, and the child-friendly spaces. So even getting kids to be able to come to these spaces is in itself crucial to be able to then communicate these kinds of messages. You can see over here, this is Muhammad Amin, who is on the right-hand side, who's one of our lead artists, as well as Muhammad Hassan in the back. And these are men who came from Myanmar, and when they were in Myanmar, they weren't able to teach because they were Rohingya and were not allowed by the government. And so within this environment, they've been able to become local leaders, as well as being able to have women who in many cases had not been able to leave their homes and take on leadership positions, being able to use the arts as a way of communicating both life-saving messages, but also educational messages about the environment. If you can go to the next slide. In the different types of programs that we have, this is a program that we did with some of our work within Palestine and Israel. And in addition to reconciliation programs working with different cultures together, we would specifically be oriented on what are the most important issues where within that community, what is identified within the environment, which comes through our curriculum. And it was identified that sea turtles were extensively dying within this community, which was right on the coastal region in the Mediterranean. And what was found was that how can we communicate the importance of not throwing plastic in the ocean, the importance of recycling, of not being able to make giant piles of trash and burning it, but rather being able to utilize the trash collection services. So this was one of the images that we made about valuing the importance of sea turtles, which was really important, but then being able to then combine that with the local traditions of the colors and the patterns of the local houses, which is a way of showing that local contextualization of what it means to be able to make art have meaning. You can go to the next slide. And you can see this is another example of work we were doing in the Aboriginal community in Australia, working in the Central Desert. And there they were talking specifically about the mining that was happening within a lot of the indigenous communities, and actually displacing some of the individuals who were then having to go to the town camps that were there. And we were working with actually a mobile dialysis unit that was specifically working on public health programs. Now, if you look here, you can also see we were using trash to be able to create actually some of the traditional animals that live in these environments. And we were specifically discussing the importance of being able to maintain the environment that is now being taken over by some of these mines. So there's a certain amount of activism and advocacy that is rooted within the arts. And this is within an early childhood learning center that families would be able to gather in. So it's a way to be able to have a conversation topic amongst parents, grandparents, as well as children themselves. You can go to the next slide. So you can see I wanted to talk about a big variety of different environments. Now, this is some of our work that's specifically within the South Sudanese refugee camps and the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement, which is the largest refugee settlement in Africa. And we have a team of 14 local artists who are both South Sudanese as well as Ugandan working together. And if you look, what was so interesting is there was a combination about the environment, but also psychological well-being of the individuals who were involved. So the story of this specific mural, which I think is amazing, was talking about the first nurse to ever graduate from a school in Juba in South Sudan, and that the importance of girls being able to go to school equal to boys. And what was so important is you can see the airplanes that are coming out of their heads and going and turning into birds. And on the other side, you can see that there are giraffes. Now, the giraffes have this amazing representation, both of the importance of conservation of the local community, as well as being able to talk about the long necks as a metaphor of being able to see over all of the traumas and being able to look to the future, which is something that's so important, of this behavioral ideation for the future, which is really crucial in being able to conceive of what's possible. Now, the reason I included this image is that if you look inside of those giraffes, it's all made out of trash. It's all made out of bottles that we collected from the community. And we even created songs that we would create about, recycle, recycle, we need to recycle, and ways of being able to remember this through being able to utilize both singing, music, as well as the arts as well. You can go to the next slide. Now, one of the crucial things is also thinking about communication and being able to think about how we can learn. This is in another school, and within this environment, this was also about both the importance of being able to listen and to learn, as well as about inter-ethnic tensions, which existed extensively. And so this was identified within the local community as being one of the most important subjects, which is being able to listen both from an educational perspective, but also making sure that people of different cultures are able to come together. And if you look specifically inside of it, you see all of these different faces that were created by actually hundreds of children within the Tuajiji community here. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to show this as kind of a background on our work, and then these are programs that were led specifically by our artists that were talking about the importance of education, but also what if there's not access to educate, to be educated and to learn about the environment in some of these programs. And this was actually talking about that specific issue by being able to have one of the kids who specifically said, well, if we don't have school buses, we always have our feet, and we can always walk to school. And that idea that no matter the situation, and even if there is not equal access to education, to be able to always have that dedication, that perseverance to be engaged is something that is really important, I think, across the world, which is when learning about these issues, to be able to understand that education is something that needs to be valued both by parents, by kids, and that the arts can be a way to communicate that. If you can go to the next slide. One of the other components of what we found is this is in the Rohingya refugee camps, and specifically within the first community art center ever created within the Rohingya culture, which we were able to create. And you can see within this that this idea of the trees, especially because deforestation is such a massive issue within this community, that when we said, okay, what's a way that this can be communicated? They said, well, what if we have a face with a tree growing out of the middle? And it's specifically symbolizing the importance of not cutting down trees for wood, but rather being able to think about ways of using renewable energy, and specifically being able to educate that in these environments, there is, through some of the international NGOs, access to natural gas, which can be used rather than deforesting the Balukhali reserve, which is that area. Now, for many people, there isn't a choice. They want to be able to cook their food or to be able to boil their water for clean water. Yet what we found is it's very important to find alternatives, and the arts is a way to educate within those specific environments. If you can go to the next slide. I wanted to show a wide range. And within this environment, this is about seed planting. So if you see this, there's actually a seed that's being given from an adult to a child, and the importance of the tradition of planting. This is, again, within the South Sudanese context of planting seeds being both a literal message about the importance of being able to grow one's own crops for renewable food sources, as well as being able to do it as a way of actually representing the future, and about the importance of being able to sow seeds of learning, of innovation, and of opportunities for growth, which I think is very important, where when you look within it, all of those very small images are all representing different priorities that the kids are able to be involved with. So you have the children who are painting, their parents who are involved, and then they can go back home into their families and become advocates, where what they learned through this painting process can then translate into learning at home. If you go to the next slide. I wanted to use this example as well. This is actually some of the work that we have done in Lebanon. And one of the things that was so important here was the importance of being able to think about sea life. You can see the sea in the background, and thinking about what does sea life mean for children who live there, and yet within schools, it's not necessarily taught about recycling. And so what we found is if we can have a giant turtle that people can go inside of, then the arts can be a way, an interactive way of being able to learn about this, where they're not just being told about these issues, but rather they are creating their interpretations of what the importance is of recycling, and then being able to put that through a actual mural. And now this lives every single day within those communities. And what we found is that across the board, being able to involve engagement within a grassroots level has been something that has continued to make a difference, because it doesn't just happen once, but it's able to every day be a reminder about the importance of the environment. And if you can even see up on the top, there's a very small image of wind power, which was something that the kids brought up about the importance of being able to have energy coming from different sources, especially not coal. You can go to the next image. So seeing all of these different images gives a good bandwidth of our work, but I wanted to specifically show that this was just in 2019 alone, we've worked with 6,000 different youth and kids we're interacted with, and that these are the different regions that we've worked with around the world, having 68 advocates and these artists who are now doing this within their own community, and they are able to become these agents of social change, many of which who've been through very serious trauma, and are able to transform that trauma into something that can have a sustainable and long-term impact within the lives of the children that they are serving. You can go to the next slide. And I wanted to specifically to see some of our artists. This is our team, who is both a mix of Bangladeshi and Rohingya artists, and this is very important. Where when you have a displacement crisis, many times there is a lot of tension because of the need for resources and the need for energy, and being able to say, well, we need to be role models of having a host community and a refugee community being able to work together to work both with refugee and host community youth, which we've been able to, for example, get permissions to be able to bring kids out of the local, out of the Rohingya refugee camp into the local community, and being able to learn about both coexistence programs coming together, but saying we both have to live on this planet together. And one of the most amazing things that happened is we had the opportunity that when we were doing this, we were doing these different name games. We were able to have kids being able to learn about each other and about each other's lives. We had one little boy who in the back raised his hand, and he said something so interesting. He said, my name is Shumo, and I'm Buddhist, and I am here from Bangladesh, and I know that there's been an atrocity that has been committed in Myanmar. There's been a genocide, and I take accountability for this. And he said something so interesting. He said, we need to treat these people like they're our brothers and our sisters, and they deserve the right to clean water and to healthy food and to be able to go to school and to be able to have the opportunity to learn. And what was amazing is as we started to look around, some of our artists were crying, and they said, God, this came out of the mouth of an 8-year-old boy. How important is it that the arts are a way to humanize, but also to open up then the opportunity to learn? And one of the topics that came out within the mural that we created was about the importance of being able to have access to electricity. And that was something that was so important for both populations, and thinking about what does that mean to the environment, but also what does that mean to interethnic relations, which is such a crucial component to our work. Now, if you go to the next slide, this specifically talks a little bit about the theoretical framework behind what we do. And I won't go too in depth on this, but the work that we're doing is really trying to make a deep-rooted impact through physical, mental, social, and emotional components of how the arts can be a way to educate. And when we talk about education, especially about sustainability and the environment, it needs to be a holistic approach. It has to be able to access both physically being able to paint, mentally thinking cognitively about what that means, socially, what does that mean through interaction and being able to learn through relationships, and emotionally, how does this make us feel? And being able to make that into something that can have a long-term impact that is both, about water, sanitation, hygiene, abuse prevention and protection, as well as awareness about public health messages, which is so crucial, but then also about how there's a social need for connecting about issues within the environment. So if you can go to the next slide, please. We then tracked what the social influences are and the spheres of influence. And so being able to consider what those approaches are, and then how can that have an impact, both from the cultural and historical perspectives, considering how can you cultivate a safe learning space, and what does that mean for a learner-centered approach? And so looking at each of these different elements, these are all elements that I think are crucial when you're considering ways of teaching about the environment, learning about, as was mentioned through Green Hope, about the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, how can we do that in a way that's engaging, that's understandable, and that can have spheres of influence that can be at a familial level, at a cultural level, and can really generate resilient approaches to the environment, as well as interpersonal issues and need for transformation? Okay, if you can go to the next slide. I wanted to then do a specific focus on the Foundstrument Soundstrument project, which is a very specific project that we do, which is focused on sustainability within Artolution. And I thought it was something that would be really important to be able to see as an alternative education methodology for learning about the environment. So you can go to the next slide. So this all started actually many years ago in my undergraduate work at a school called RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. And this was a interactive sculpture that was all musical, working at the Children's Museum in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was all made from materials that had been thrown away, that had been recycled. And so you can see it was involving children, it was involving families, and it was learning, wow, maybe this is something that could engage people both through tangibly recycling, but then also using it as a a way to educate. So you can go to the next slide. And thinking, how can this be something that's engaging, but also can be participatory? So this is what we call the Art Dude suit. And it was a suit also all made out of recycled materials that kids would be able to play. And this was specifically in Costa Rica, working with indigenous communities. You can go to the next slide. And you can see that kids were able to play this, usually using drumsticks. And so you can see here that it had all these different ways of being able to be played. And then it was actually something that could be taken off and could open kids up, so that then when we start to have conversations about the environment, about clean water, about water filtration systems, which is something we discussed, that then it would be something that they'd be opened up to using this specific methodology. You can go to the next slide as well. So you can see that it also involved parents. And that's something that's so crucial, I think, when talking, having parents and children being able to both be equally represented within the learning spheres of what matters the most to them. You can go to the next slide. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about, if you see, is taking trash and then transforming it. Right, and saying that trash is not just something that both that is completely invaluable, but that it needs to be recycled and that it can be upcycled. So these were all bottles that we had collected that were painted by the local community in a place called La Cebolleta in Mexico. I can go to the next slide. And this really shows the evolution of this program, where we took these and used all materials where, unfortunately, in this community, there was no trash collection services. So they're saying, what are we going to do with all of this trash? So we just had it in piles down in the valley, and that animals were choking on this, and it was something that was very dangerous and difficult. So we took piles and piles of this, painted all of these, and then ended up attaching them to a local tree that were then also talking about the local traditions, and being able, if you go to the next slide, you can see that we were able to have the local Modukami, the local religious leader, who came and played and used it for songs. And I had recently gotten a report that this is still being used daily, and that kids use it to be able to make music, and that it's able to continue to live. Now, if you can go to the next slide. And in these programs, this was also working in Australia, working with the Torres Strait Islander community. That some said, well, we don't have one place we want this to be. We want to use it in parades. So they actually created songs that were about recycling, and then those songs were then able to be part of this parade, where this is actually a movable sculpture that was able to be moved across the town, from both being used in the music education program in the local school to be able to teach about the environment and sustainability. So you can go to the next slide. So this idea of foundstrument, soundstrument is able to transcend many barriers. This was work that we've done in Peru, working with local nuns and with local girls. And this was something where they had said, well, maybe we can use this to both teach, but it can be something as well that shows as a role model of what's possible. Right, and that we can use bottles not just to be able to make sculptures, but also to plant, to be able to plant gardens, which was something that they had done. So they ended up using recycled materials after we had created this, to be able to create gardens within their local community. I can go to the next slide. And so within this, we had done all kinds of different trash collection as well. And this is working in India, in the Okla phase 1 in India. And we had gone to some of the trash collectors and said, you know, what are the things that you're not going to be using? And we had been able to obtain some of these. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that we did all different kinds of workshops of being able to bang on these, being able to make different percussive rhythms, and as well as, you know, talking about recycling. You can go to the next slide. And what we ended up creating was this giant sculpture that this was part of it. This was a discarded car door that was on the side of the road. And we're then painted, and we're beautified, and we're transformed into something new by girls from the local community. If you go to the next slide, you can see this was the ending sculpture that was created, which was played, and then there ended up being a performance that was then able to both use music but also use theater through actually our head of performance. Her name is CJ Thomas. She was able to then do a performance, but then teaching local people as well about different ways of using theater and learning as well. So it was something that was able to continue by having hundreds of different people who were able to come from all of the families to be able to learn about these specific issues that were taught by the kids. You can go to the next slide. And what we found, something that's really essential, is that in some of these environments, there's these massive trash dumps. This is in the Dominican Republic, and these massive trash dumps do not necessarily have sustainable ways of being able to utilize the trash. And something that we found, and very important, was that they're trash pickers. That's their whole life. That's what they do. And so what we did is we worked with some of the trash pickers to go through and collect some of these materials, and you can go to the next slide. And you can see what we were able to turn it into. And we turned it into what we called the boatsterment. And this was all from all of that trash that was totally discarded. And we worked with the children from the local school, as well as working with some of the trash pickers to collect these materials, and then to be able to create this, which was all about the pollution in the local river. And so we're looking at very tangible examples of ways of educating, and that so much trash was thrown into the local river that it was no longer usable, it was not drinkable, it was not something that was able to still have a life. And so they were saying, well, maybe we could teach about this. This could be something that we could educate about, and specifically thinking about how can we do it in a locally contextualized way. So this is all referencing the Carnival, which is a huge festival that is in the Dominican Republic, specifically in Santiago, in the community in the south. If you go to the next slide. Now, all of these examples, you can see this is the much larger perspective of a whole mural that we created with local artists and children. And you can see that it was also touching on the importance of animals, you can see on the right, and also paying homage to the indigenous community of the Taínos, who had largely been decimated because of colonization, and being able to pay homage to these communities and the importance of their respect for the land and for the water and for the rivers of Santiago. If you go to the next slide. So as you look at all of these different examples, you can see that each one of them has its own perspective on how the arts can be used for sustainability. This one was in the Samos refugee camp in Greece on the border of Turkey. And this was built and lives in front of this refugee community. And one of the things that was so important, and I think this is crucial, these were all things that were yet again being thrown away, but there was actually a boat that was coming up right as we were finishing this. And these were all kids who were from Afghanistan, they were from Syria, from Palestine. They were coming also from the Congo and from Sudan. And they weren't able to communicate. Some spoke Arabic, others were speaking Pashtun and Urdu, and they weren't able to communicate. So we were using trash as a way to communicate across barriers. And there was a boat that had come up from the Mediterranean, and there was all these people who were coming, and they had their blankets, and they were shivering. And there was one man who came over and saw all these kids from different cultures from around the world all banging on this crazy creature, and he came over and he grabbed me and he started hugging me and kissing me on the cheeks, and he said, "I didn't think this is what a refugee camp would look like. This is what freedom looks like." And this idea of how we can use trash from an environment which is polluting, and instead to become this transformation and become this reclamation of what freedom can mean, this is so important. And this was a huge part of my doctoral research of my time at Teachers College at Columbia. If you go to the next slide. Of being able to see how can transformation, what can that look like? And for this, for example, these were cars that were abandoned in the middle of the desert in the Za'atari refugee camp in Jordan. And you can see we took these cars, and these were kids that we were working with, and being able to take them and give them a new life. Now, if you go to the next slide, we also used it as a livelihoods component of learning about how to build things, about how to be able to grow. And this is what we decided what was decided to be created, working with the Norwegian Refugee Council. And what was so interesting is if you look at this, there was both the component of sustainability, but then there was also the component of thinking about what do you want to say to the world? And some of the kids, there was one little girl who said, my dream is to become a city planner. And so I would love to be able to paint that. So we had this girl you see on the right who then transformed into a city planner. And you can see that this is the city that she wants to build for the future. Now, if you go to the next slide, you could you can see these creatures that we created that were all made out of trash, and that this was something that was we were working with the local trash collection services and recycling, and that these were discarded. They were things that not only didn't have value, but that they were an embarrassment in some ways. That, oh, there's these abandoned, burnt out cars, and there's all this trash everywhere, and saying, actually, this is something that can inspire pride. This is something that the kids in this local community can feel a sense of ownership and meaning, and that's really important. So if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the kids that we worked with in the process, and being able to involve kids of all levels, early childhood development, which is such an important element, as well as being able to work with teenagers as well. And you can see, if you go to the next slide, one of the creatures that we were able to create here. And if you go to the next one as well, I think it's an even better piece. And this is something that's still, yes, exactly. And so you can see, it's a very bleak, very difficult environment. And being able to use trash both as a way of inspiring joy, as well as learning about the environment. I can go to the next slide. And as we look at these different slides, and you look at these different kids, these are experiences that are critically creating memory at pivotal moments of development. And within developmental psychology, how can you make a memory that's able to continue to teach lessons that will be remembered? And this is the type of a very unique experience that's able to continue to make a difference, because it's something that you'll never forget. And that's a very important component to how can you create a shift that lasts within the minds of children. I'm moving to the next slide. And thinking about the meaning that comes from this, and that both this continues to live in the community, but also the memories never die. So that some of these communities, for example, some of our artists have actually returned back to Syria, and that for them, thinking about ways that they're able to include this within their lives and trying to rebuild their homes, rebuild their communities, that this is something that continues to last even if they're leaving to a different location, especially because of global migration. You can go to the next slide. And so when you look at this, you can see all of these different ways of being able to create this work. This was also focusing on whales. This was in Jordan, which was so interesting that one of the biggest emphasis was thinking, okay, how can we discuss the importance of animals and about sustaining animals? And so you can see this, and inside of it, there's actually all kinds of calligraphy, which says different words in Arabic of the importance of recycling and about the importance of sustainability. Going to the next slide. So as we look at all of these different works, you can think, well, what does this mean across these different contexts? And this is an example in Brazil, where it was actually specifically during the Zika virus outbreak, which now has so much value if we look at what's happening today with COVID. And during this, we were specifically teaching about biology. And about the importance of understanding about cells, bacteria, and this is working in one of the favelas called Favela Vidigal. And if you look at this image, there was all different elements of cells that were painted by the kids of different body parts that were creating this single creature. So when you look at this, it was both teaching about biology, the body, about the importance of washing hands, understanding about healthy bacteria and dangerous bacteria, and then understanding that this can then come through actually samba performances, where we worked with the local samba group to be able to use local music and traditions to be able to make music that was teaching about biology. We can go to the next slide. And so each of these different elements have different ways of being able to communicate. And this was working in a different favela that was then specifically talking about how there were trees that were, this was during the fires in Brazil, and was talking about trees that were cut down, turned into wood, sent to the favelas, and then were thrown away. And so what we did is we use these trees, teaching about the importance of not throwing away wood, but using it to be able to create different types of structures, both within the home, but then as well as being able to do this within a sculpture. And this was specifically working with an artist named JR, being able to use recycled woods. We were learning both about what was happening in the Amazon, but then what was happening right within the favelas as well. Going to the next slide. And so looking at this, I think this is one of the most powerful images, in my opinion, which was the elephant instrument. We're back to Uganda and the work we've done on the border of South Sudan. And what was so interesting is that there were a lot of elephants who had been displaced because of the building of the settlement there in 2015. As I said, we want to have an homage to the elephants. And there was a story when we said, well, what would you want to make? They said, there's a story that when we were leaving our homes because of the internal tribal conflict within South Sudan, the elephants left with us. And so being able to tell that story was something that was so crucial, because it was able to both be a memory and being able to pay homage to the homes that they had to leave, but then also being able to understand about the elephants that were displaced because of this. And so being able to educate and being able to use that within the classrooms, it then continues to live as a reminder about the elephants that had been displaced because of the local refugee settlement. Moving to the next slide. And when you look at each of these different elements, this is one where both you can think about how this is actually a water pump in the Rohingya camps that was all made out of trash, but then also talking about the importance of washing our hands and stopping the spread of disease. So you can see this is a woman who's holding a soap, holding soap up in in her hand. And when we look at that, we can start to see this is something that is both talking about public health and the health of each other, but then also being able to utilize the trash that was spewed about the local community. And then this is also working within Colombia, and you can see that. Oh no, it's okay. You can go to the next slide. You can see that the work we had done in Colombia was working with the Venezuelan displaced community, which was here, and it says and there it says no más bullying. And it was talking about the bullying that was so prevalent between the different groups there. But then it was also talking about the local monkeys that were living within the local community, and being able to teach about this through being able to build a giant monkey that lives there every day. Moving on to the next slide. So all of these programs are led by our local artists, by local teams. And that's really important for them, both educating, but also having the opportunity to learn about these issues and using different pedagogical structures to be able to teach about what that can mean. And I wanted to include this just to be able to show about some of the metal recycling we had done of a welded project through Columbia, through a teacher's college there. You can go to the next slide. And so each of these different programs was utilizing the opposite direction, yes, was utilizing different ways of using trash. And this, for example, was a very different world where we were working with a rehabilitation program with people who were addicted to narcotics. And you think, well, what's the importance of learning about the environment, sustainability within that component? And it was really important because it was something where for them, they were very much, thinking about their need to grow and to have a resilience-based approach to learning, and that being able to utilize trash was something where, no matter the conflicts they've been through, whether it be methamphetamines or heroin, that being able to use trash as a way to express themselves was able to have both education, but also doing something very unconventional and very unexpected within their lives. So if you go to the next example, which I think is also really important, you can see a very strong, if you go to the next slide, very strong example of us working with the LGBTQ community and being able, you can see here, working with kids who had autism and special needs. So they were able to come together, being able to meet each other for the first time, being able to talk, and they both said, what's most important is this idea of a rebirth. And that rebirth can come through the idea of a phoenix being rebirthed from the ashes, which you can see over here on the left. And if you go to the next slide, this now exists in New York City. And there's a specific component where you can see it that these were yet again all made of recycled materials, but it was also being able to talk about how the importance of the environment, especially in this time where there's such conflict about how to be able to teach about global warming and climate change, that this needs to happen, with the special needs community. That has to happen with the LGBTQ community, people who have been incarcerated or who are in a rehabilitation system, people who are marginalized. All of these different types of populations all have such a crucial need to be able to embrace the planet and to be able to embrace the importance of understanding about sustainability in the environment. Now, I wanted to do a final just little section about how we've been able to adapt to COVID. And for us, we have specifically had our communities around the world educating through the arts about the importance of taking public health measures. And that is something that we found that there is a direct correlation both between people's psychological well-being, but also the way that they're interacting with each other and the environment. So if you go to the next slide, well, one of the things that we've found is there have to be ways that, for example, there's been a huge decrease in food shortages within a lot of communities that we've worked in. And that in large part is because of some of the funding reallocation, which is so difficult. So we said, well, how can we teach about COVID in a way that matters to local people? And this is Anwara, one of our lead artists in Bangladesh. And this is one of the murals that she did, being able to personify what it means so that it can be understood by children. And these are canvases produced in the safety of one's own home. And then these canvases are now able to educate to the general population, both about public health and about the importance of behaviors that can be able to stop the spread of the disease. And I wanted to focus on this because of the era that we're in right now. So you can see here, this was in front of a local mosque, and it was specifically talking about the importance of people being able to be socially distanced within the local mosques, as well as being able to change out the different prayer rugs, which was through focus groups with local imams working with UNICEF in Cox's Bazar in the southern tip of Bangladesh. You can go to the next slide. And so seeing these different examples are some of the ways that we've been able to adapt, as well as being able to discuss the importance of how has this impacted both people's lives, but also the local environment. And what does this mean? So this was one of the reflections that we had that came through a tree growing out of a woman's hand, as you can see in the middle, and about the importance of planting trees, but then also the importance of neonatal care, and how women who are pregnant are able to deal with the crisis that's currently happening. Going to the next slide. And you can see that, you can see all of the trash over here on the left. So this is something that there's a dire need to be able to discuss this and to be able to have different ways of utilizing the arts to make this a reality. So if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the imagery that's been created has been very much within local pattern making, being able to use ways that are very much made by local communities, but then also are able to make it so that these children and these artists and the people who are engaged with this are able to teach about the Sustainable Development Goals, are able to teach their local community about what this means, both within their lives, and as you can see here, about the importance of the elephants. And I wanted to use this example because of the deforestation that had happened within the Balu Kali Nature Preserve because of the largest refugee camp in history to ever exist. And so this was specifically talking about this and about the importance of reforesting and replanting trees that you can see here so that elephants can come back to their native environment, which is something that's so important when we look at ecology. And I wanted to end with this slide, which is some of the elephants of being able to come back to life within some of the actual concrete barriers because of the mudslides that have been happening there. So just to conclude this presentation, I wanted to show how the arts need to be seen as at the forefront, and that they can be at the forefront of the response to global crises. That crises that exist from the environment, crises that exist all over the world, whether it be human-made or environmentally made, that the arts have a very special role to play. And that role is to be able to communicate messages that nothing else can. And that when we look at what the long-term impacts and implications are of integrating arts, creativity, and expression into education in emergency settings and across the world, that what we find is that it is a way to amplify messages that can be relatable and meaningful to people all across the world. And to finish, there's one story that I wanted to finish with, which was one man who whose name is Muhammad Ibrahim, who we worked with, and he said, I have seen my children not have water and not have food and not be able to live. And he was from Syria, and he said, every day is better than the last. And I said, what makes you say that, Muhammad Ibrahim? And he said, because we are still alive. And the arts give us a meaning to live, and it gives us a meaning to fight for the planet and to fight for what we believe in. And it gives a voice in a way that nothing else can. So I would highly recommend that you see more of our work at artolution.org. You can follow our work on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And maybe most importantly is that any way that the arts can be used to educate and to be able to advocate on behalf of the planet, now is the most important time in history to be able to utilize new methodologies to change what is possible for the future and for the future of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. You taught
Thank
us science of art is a science of teaching, right? And the sustainability, the ecological balance, the trauma, the working with refugee, and you are doing great work. And I salute your work, and it's a very learning experience. I'm sure that your work will be appreciated worldwide, and you are inspiring many lives and bringing a smile in many faces through your art. Your art is your way of communication. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So now I request our next presenter, Dr. Sarah and Lee Nunes. They are the